In the last two, we've talked about our adversary who walks around as a roaring lion, and then we talked about not being terrified by our adversary in any way, in no way being terrified by adversity. So today I want to look at how we are given a victory. It's through the grace, the presence, and the power of God. So in 2 Corinthians in chapter 2, there are two verses that we're going to look at. These are verses 14 and 15 in 2 Corinthians chapter 2. Now, Paul is writing to the Corinthians. This is a follow-up letter from his first one, 1 Corinthians, obviously. And he's making a statement here. He's talking about what he and those with him have experienced and are experiencing. And he talks about God's faithfulness and how God intervenes and causes them to triumph. But I want to take this personally because what Paul's expressing and explaining is not something that's just because he's some special individual as an apostle, but this is something that God does, and there's some really important aspects to it. So in 2 Corinthians 2, verse 14 and verse 15, he says, "Now thanks be to God who always leads us in triumph in Christ, and through us diffuses the fragrance of his knowledge in every place." In verse 15, "For we are to God the fragrance of Christ among those who are being saved and among those who are perishing." All right, so he says that God causes us to always triumph. Now, when you read this in the context, you see he's referring to the difficulties, the adversities that he faces in bringing the gospel, in actually delivering it and helping people to understand the heart, the will of God. So God is the one who takes him from the adversity into triumph and victory. And in fact, Jesus has already paid the price, already bought your freedom and your victory. What is it that he wants to accomplish through this? The next time we're also going to be looking at another verse in 2 Corinthians that talks about this. But what's revealed in this verse 14 is that he diffuses through us the very fragrance of Christ. That we are, as he says in verse 14, that we are through us, he diffuses the fragrance of his knowledge in every place, because we are to God the fragrance of Christ. So my salvation, my walk in him, my walking worthy and pleasing to him is not just that I'm just saved, but it's actually that the fragrance of Christ is dispersed. So it's not about what I'm going through that determines how I am. It's God causing me to triumph, that his light shines through me, that and putting it in the context of the fragrance, the actual smell of Jesus is what's left. That's what remains in the place when I've been there, after I've been there, after I leave, while I'm there, and after I leave. It's the very fragrance, the smell of Christ. So when I'm going through these adversities and these difficult times, what is the impact of my living my Christianity? What's the impact of me being a believer? What is left behind? How does this affect? Because he says that God's causing me to triumph, that I rise above the adversity in order that I leave the smell, the fragrance of Christ behind. Let this sink in, because we sometimes want the circumstance to change so it'll be all better, so that I will be okay. And God is saying, in these circumstances, where you are, I want Christ to be experienced. Jesus said that when you see me, you've seen the Father. And he invited us and told us to follow him. And so as I follow him and I'm transformed by this good news, and God's grace empowers me, and I live the power of Christ's resurrection, I am moved beyond and above circumstances. That's why I am not terrified by my adversities, the adversary. I am aware of him as he's seeking to devour me, and yet I am not being devoured because I have access to God's heart, to what his will is, what he says, and he causes me to triumph.